Today I'm going to talk about cultural heritage and what we do with it, what it becomes and whose it is. This is because Sweden recently had our annual all politicians and influential people go to Gotland and talk about Stuff Week, aka the Almedalen week. And during this week the National Heritage Board invited to a panel talk named Your Cultural Heritage is Falling Apart, So What?, which discussed topics like what should be saved, who is it that who will save it, and how do we choose those people. Perhaps we should use and wear out instead of saving, and the use of what, and how do you save on knowledge to future generations. For archaeologists and academics within the cultural heritage sector, this might feel like these questions are always the ones being discussed, and my take on that is because it's always an issue. The most important part within an archaeological process, according to me, is the outreach outside of the academical and archaeological sphere. This is where we take the remains of days past and turn them into something intriguing and important for today's people. And if the stories aren't told, they become just another report dusting in some archive, and that's quite sad and not really helping anybody. Of course we can't save everything for many reasons. Not everything needs saving. Sometimes some things just make fine being alone and not being fiddled with by humans, and not everything is to be saved. If we were going to save everything in an archaeological sense, like excavating and documenting everything, nothing would be done, because the past is all over the place, and nothing would ever be able to be built, because we would basically be sitting rolling our thumbs, because the best way of saving an ancient site without destroying it is to not touch it most of the time. Sometimes, obviously, things happen. In Sweden, most of the archaeology in form of excavation is contract archaeology and or rescue archaeology, meaning that some builder or developer is going to build, and that thing that they are going to build is going to damage an archaeological site, and the county has deemed the archaeological site to be too valuable to just let them bulldoze it. And then in comes the archaeologist and excavate and document the site, and developer can go on with their business, and the archaeological process in this produces a lot of data and information that the archaeologist processes, and then the artifacts go to a local or national museum to be preserved, and sometimes they are put into exhibitions. The talk and the panel talk here seem to be more about museums' roles in this process rather than archaeologists. And the ethnologist who was one of the panelists was quite interesting. He was the only one not working within the cultural heritage sector, and he seemed to frankly provoke some of the others a few times with what he said. He was not a big fan of preserving, because he, according to my interpretation of things, finds that it's against the natural order of things, that to desperately try to keep things and save them and hoard the past just to keep it was not a good thing in itself. And I can agree with some points that he made, even though I kind of admit that I rolled my eyes when he went off on a bit of a rant about power and who chooses what is cultural heritage, and what will be preserved. He argues that who are this elite that just sits within institutions and decides what will be saved and what doesn't, and that it was an undemocratic process. And then I felt kind of tired and thought, well, somebody has to do it. And I agree with the lady in the panel that argued that we can't do a truly democratic process because we can't hold public elections about such things for pure public practical reasons. Even though the most interesting question for me during this panel talk didn't get much time, It was how to save and portray the knowledge of the past and from the past to future generations. We talked about it a bit, but not nearly enough, according to me. How to portray the past outside of this 19th century national state building way that we are used to was talked about, which made me glad. I'm a strong believer that the past never should stifle societal progress or spread views that narrow the experience of living in this world. States and borders of today had nothing to do with the past, so I don't see why they should really play into how we talk about the past either. But it does, even though it's slowly changing. People have their views that have been taught in school and by museums and in books. Vikings are a classical example of this. During the 19th century they have been used to create multiple national identities for Sweden. They have been used for warriors, they have been used as traders, as the first true democracy with the things and stuff. At the moment, sadly, they are mostly used they're used by rather extreme right-wing people in Sweden who tries to force their xenophobic and narrow-minded views into the Viking stereotype, disregarding that Sweden didn't exist at the time and that these people that they are idolizing seem to have been far from xenophobic or narrow-minded when it comes to other cultures. The Vikings has been used frequently during the 19th and 20th century, not only by right-wing groups but by most of the political spectra. And in the end, they are just as seafaring people that lived in the same geographical space as we do now, and they had traditions and things that we can still see signs of in the archaeological records and even in some historical records, and it's an intriguing tale that they tell, but they're not to be used as a nationalistic icon, if you ask for my opinion. And related to this somewhat is the discussion that came up about World Heritage status, which by one of the panelists was called laying a dead hand on a site because of the constricts of usage that the sites then endure. It made me kind of happy. I have a special interest in World Heritage issues, and I was excited to see it being discussed on such a national arena. And I agree that in Sweden it seldom seems to bring much good in the long run for the site. People get all excited and the sites get a title, and then they realize that it's very much a responsibility and how much it costs to keep it up and running and in an interesting way for the public. I have to cut this short, I'm sorry, but I highly recommend any viewer that is proficient in Swedish or want to learn to watch the recording of the panel talk. I'm going to link it in the below. It was very interesting, and I wish I could link the rest of you a subbed version of it, but sadly there isn't one and I don't have the time to make one for you. I'm sure these issues aren't only in Sweden, and I would love for you to share your stories and views in the comment section